She said yes to a man she'd never seen, never touched, never even heard breathe on the other end of a phone call. Just words on a screen, late at night, glowing softly in the dark. And 10 years later, they're still together. Still in love. Still proving that the most impossible stories are sometimes the ones that survive the longest. If that sounds reckless to you, stay with me. Because this isn't just a love story. It's a study in trust, in loneliness, in the quiet desperation that drives people to do things the world calls crazy. And if you've ever felt like the traditional path wasn't built for you, if you've ever wondered whether connection can bloom in the strangest soil, then you're going to want to hear what happened next. Hit that like button if you're ready for something real, and subscribe because we're diving deep into stories that don't fit into neat little boxes. Her name was Rebecca. Mid-30s, living in a studio apartment in Portland, working customer service for a health insurance company. The kind of job where you apologize all day for things that aren't your fault, where you smile with your voice even when your soul feels gray. She wasn't unhappy, exactly. But she was hollow. That specific kind of hollow that comes from routine without meaning, from days that blur into weeks that blur into years. She'd been on the dating apps. She'd gone to the bars. She'd let her friends set her up with coworkers and former classmates and guys who seemed nice enough on paper. And every time, it felt like she was performing a role in a play she hadn't auditioned for. So she stopped trying. She deleted the apps. She stopped going out. And in that quiet space, where expectation falls away and you're left with just yourself, she found something unexpected. An online forum. Not a dating site. Not even close. It was a philosophy discussion board, the kind of niche corner of the internet where people with too many thoughts and not enough outlets go to feel less alone. They talked about Kierkegaard and Camus, about whether meaning is discovered or created, about the small tragedies of being human in a world that doesn't pause long enough to notice. And that's where she met him. His username was something forgettable, something generic. But his words weren't. He wrote the way some people breathe, effortlessly, like the thoughts flowed from some deep well inside him that never ran dry. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't posturing. He was just present, in a way that most people aren't, even when they're standing right in front of you. They started messaging privately. Long, winding conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. They talked about everything and nothing. About childhood fears and adult disappointments. About the books that had shaped them and the moments that had broken them. And somewhere in those exchanges, something shifted. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was recognition. Like finding a mirror that reflected back not your face, but your soul. His name was Daniel. He lived in New Zealand. 12 time zones away. He worked in marine biology, studying the behavior of deep-sea creatures, things that lived in darkness so complete that they generated their own light. He'd been married once before, briefly, disastrously. He'd learned the hard way that proximity doesn't equal intimacy, that you can share a bed with someone and still feel utterly alone. So he'd pulled back too. Stopped looking. Stopped hoping. Until Rebecca. They talked for 6 months before they ever heard each other's voices. Another 3 before they video called. And when they finally did, when the screen flickered to life and she saw his face for the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in an unassuming way. But because he was real. Because the person she'd been falling for in text existed in flesh and bone and breath. And he looked at her the same way. Like he'd been waiting for her without knowing it. The proposal came on a random Tuesday. No build-up. No grand romantic gesture. Just a message that appeared on her screen while she was eating leftover pad thai at her desk. "I know this is insane," he wrote. "But I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. And I don't want to waste any more time pretending we're not already committed to each other in every way that matters." She stared at those words for a long time. She thought about all the reasons it was a terrible idea. The distance. The logistics. The fact that they'd never been in the same room. The fact that everyone she knew would think she'd lost her mind. The fact that statistically, realistically, rationally, this shouldn't work. But then she thought about the alternative. Going back to the safe, acceptable path. Waiting for someone local, someone convenient, someone who checked all the boxes but didn't know her. Not really. Not the way Daniel did. She typed 3 letters. Yes. They got married over video call. No guests. No ceremony. Just the 2 of them and an officiant in Nevada who specialized in remote weddings. They wore nice shirts, at least from the waist up. They said vows they'd written themselves, words that felt heavier and more honest than any script. And when it was over, when the officiant declared them legally bound, they sat in their separate rooms, on opposite sides of the planet, and felt something that defied the distance. They felt together. The plan was always for one of them to move. They just had to figure out who, and when, and how. Visas take time. Paperwork takes time. Life, it turns out, doesn't pause just because you've made a life-altering decision. Rebecca kept working her customer service job. Daniel kept studying his deep-sea creatures. And they kept talking. Every day. Multiple times a day. They fell asleep on video calls. They watched movies together, screens synced, commentary flowing. They cooked the same meals and ate them side by side, separated by thousands of miles and connected by something that had no name. It took 14 months for Rebecca to get her visa approved. 14 months of bureaucracy and waiting and doubt that crept in during the quiet moments. Doubt that whispered, what if you get there and it's different? What if the magic only works through screens? What if you've built this entire fantasy on a foundation of pixels and longing? But she got on the plane anyway. She landed in Auckland on a rainy afternoon in March. She walked through customs with a suitcase and a backpack and a heart that hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. And when she stepped through those sliding doors into the arrivals hall, when she saw him standing there, holding a sign with her name on it even though he was the only person she was looking for, she knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't reckless. This was the first real thing she'd done in years. They hugged. And it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. The first year was hard. Not because they didn't love each other. But because love, it turns out, isn't the only thing you need to build a life. You need compromise. You need patience. You need the ability to navigate the small, unglamorous realities of sharing space with another human. Rebecca had to adjust to a new country, a new culture, a new rhythm. Daniel had to adjust to not being alone, to making room for someone else's habits and needs and moods. They fought. They cried. They had moments where they looked at each other and wondered if they'd made a catastrophic error. But they stayed. They worked through it. They learned each other in 3 dimensions, in morning breath and bad moods and all the unfiltered, unedited truth that never makes it into late-night messages. And somewhere in that messy, difficult process, they built something solid. Something real. 10 years later, they're still in New Zealand. Rebecca works remotely now, writing grants for environmental nonprofits. Daniel still studies the ocean. They have a small house with a view of the water. They have routines. They have inside jokes. They have the kind of quiet, steady love that doesn't make headlines but sustains a life. People still ask them how they made it work. How they took such a massive risk on a stranger. And Rebecca always says the same thing. He wasn't a stranger. He was the first person who actually saw me. And I'd rather build a life with someone who knows my soul than someone who only knows my face. This story doesn't have a moral. It's not a blueprint. It's not advice. It's just proof that sometimes, the things that look the most reckless from the outside are the things that make the most sense when you're living them. That sometimes, connection happens in the least expected places. That sometimes, saying yes to the impossible is the sanest thing you can do. Because at the end of the day, we're all just looking for someone who makes the world feel a little less lonely. And if you find that person, if you stumble into that rare, fragile thing, then maybe the distance doesn't matter. Maybe the logistics don't matter. Maybe the only thing that matters is whether you're brave enough to hold on.